You're listening to 9 Plus, a research podcast from Waterford Institute of Technology. Hello and welcome to the 9 Plus podcast, named as such to reflect the work being conducted at postgraduate level 9 and above at WIT. My name is Rob O'Connor. Today on the podcast I'm speaking with Geralidine Canny, the Head of Research at WIT, and Josephine Holohan, Project Manager at the Research Support Unit, or RSU. We talked about funding mechanisms available to researchers and the role the RSU can play in their journey and some of the supports that it can provide. If you've ever wondered how research funding works and perhaps how you can access some of it yourself, this is the episode to listen to. The RSU have lots of material published online at wit.ie/research, so as you listen to this, there's a lot more detail to be found online. Don't be afraid to dive in. As always, I began the conversation by asking my guests to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Jo Holohan. I'm a projects manager over in the RSU in WIT.
Hi Rob, thank you for inviting us today. My name is Geralidine Canny. I'm Head of Research at WIT.
So we're going to talk about the Research Support Unit, the RSU, talk about research funding support, scholarships, we talk about the Research Awards, some challenges for researchers and a whole variety of different topics tied up with this. I suppose we're talking about the business of research, or the nuts and bolts of research, as opposed to an individual researcher's work, although feel free to reference any of your own work if it's relevant. I'll start with the RSU, the Research Support Unit. Let's imagine I don't know anything about that. What is the RSU and what is it that you do there?
Well, the Research Support Unit, our busy team, is comprised of myself, Jo, the National Funding Officer, Jamie Power, the European Funding Officer, Philomena Tracy, and a staff officer, Monica Hearn, who deals with the scholarships and assists Jo with those. We are part of the wider RIGS team, led by VP RIGS, Mark White, which is Research, Innovation and Graduate Studies. And our everyday business is to enable and support researchers in the acquisition of external, often competitive research funding for various staff at various levels, in collaboration with industry or charities or NGOs, so across the gamut of research types. And we support them all the way through the life cycle of a funded research project. So from the pre-award support, which is prior to them submitting the application, advising them about the type of grant to go for and how to write it, to the post-award management. And for that, we collaborate with other units such as the finance team to make sure that the budgets are correct and in compliance with the rules both of the institution and the funding body, because compliance is important for the correct implementation of the project. We also, on, for example, intellectual property related matters, would liaise with James O'Sullivan at the TTO. We liaise with the communications team when there's good news. We win new awards. There are big developments for the institution. We also liaise with Emer Fitzpatrick in terms of training for researchers in various types of training. So, for example, how to write a grant or how to integrate gender into your research section. So basically we have collaborations with other units across the institution as well.
So that's a very comprehensive answer. There's quite a lot going on there. Would it be fair to say if you provide the scaffolding for other people to do the work? Would that be, as in other people to do, I want to do a bit of research in networks or something like that, and I need some money to do this, to pay myself, maybe to pay a team, maybe to pay some postgraduate students. I come to you and you, right, let's see how we can work all this out. Would that be, that's probably a gross simplification, is it?
No, that's globally right, Rob. We support researchers to identify and win research funding and also how to manage it, but it's done in the correct way. We try to maximise their chances of success, and we provide, the bureaucratic supports and tools and documentation to them as well. We provide quite several resources on the WIT Hub in terms of how to put together a consortium, a group of people coming together to apply for a research grant. We provide information on ethics, on various elements and cross-cutting issues, open science, which is all very important for the conduct of high-quality research. And ultimately, we're hoping to increase research capacity and capability across all the different research domains and researchers at different levels for the institution. And this is particularly important as we become a technological university.
So let's talk about funding streams then. Which is, I suppose, the business end of things. But ultimately, if there's no funding, you can't do the work because you can't pay yourself. What are the main funding streams that are available here?
There are a number, and a large number, and I suppose that's half of what we help people like that. We provide, we navigate that landscape to give information out to researchers dependent on whether it be local, national or European type funding. And there are a myriad of different calls, different funding opportunities. So like in your example, somebody wants to do a research project in a certain area and to facilitate resources to do that. Once we understand the vision of the project that the researcher has, we then look to the landscape to see what funding opportunities are there to map to that. So at a local level, you have a lot of national instruments that we work through to work with enterprise. So things like the LEO, the Local Enterprise Office, EI, Enterprise Ireland, all of those, more enterprise-based locally have funding opportunities that we work with industry and we help people to secure funds of that nature. Then you can move more to nationally where you've larger, more competitive funds. And in the national landscape, there are a number of agencies such as IRC, the Irish Research Council, SFI, Science Foundation Ireland, HRB is the Health Research Board. There are a large number, and I suppose that's part of our role, Rob, is to kind of delve into those and understand those agencies, understand all the various programmes and all the various calls and break those down so that we can either target particular researchers with that, communicate that information out, and then also if individuals approach us that we can signpost them to the correct funding calls for their particular project or their particular area or discipline. It could be anywhere from archaeology to zoology. Like it's a massive, massive spread. And we're not, I suppose, experts in all of those scientific fields. But we do understand the different calls that are available, the different funding opportunities. And more importantly, I suppose, the eligibility criteria, that we navigate that so that somebody doesn't spend a long time working on a proposal that they're not actually either entitled to get or they don't have the correct recipe or consortium there in place. The European landscape then is much larger, and as Geraldine mentioned, we have a national programmes officer that's dedicated to those calls and a European programmes officer, and they understand each of those calls and how they think. So like the European is really, really big in that there are a number of pillars, and underneath those pillars, there are a number of different calls, from individual fellowships right through to large cluster-based consortium applications across many disciplines, from health, ICT, agri, bioeconomy. There's various ones, and it can be quite daunting for a new researcher to come and understand this landscape. But we demystify that and we break down those calls to support our researchers. So like, for example, last term alone, we submitted 196 proposals across all of these various agencies. And if you look then at what we brought in 15.4 million in research income. And the breakdown of that was 78% of that was from national funding, 13% from EU and 9% from industry. So we have a large portfolio and we understand these individual programmes. So the key message there is come to us, come to the research webpage, come to our national programme officer or European programme officer to demystify that. And, it shouldn't be a daunting thing. We have the experience and the knowledge, and then it's about getting something to suit your project or your research area that you want to investigate further, I guess. So the streams are multiple. I'm afraid there's no brief answer on that.
No. As you were describing it, and you were talking about the kind of local, national, European, in my head, I was imagining that the funding mix would be the smallest amount local, the next amount national, and then the largest amount European. But then you said your figures there from just the last term, and it was the national one was the most. Would that be mostly from Science Foundation Ireland, or where is that normal? Is basically my question.
I suppose we'd seen a slight drop in European funding on the onset of the new programme. So a new programme now used to be Horizon 2020, now Horizon Europe. So in that there was probably a gap in last term in terms of what we brought in from the European side, and that would typically be larger in that the scale of individual funding is larger. However, there are a lot more national agencies, and we've started to have more success in different agencies. So we had an increase in success at SFI. We had more success with Irish Research Council, and that's due to us learning and passing on that learnings to enhance and the quality of our application. So yes, it was definitely a bumper year for national and an increase there. And the size, I think, of a lot of the national awards has also too increased. But they range from very small monies to maybe innovation vouchers of €5,000 to SFI-based grants of €300,000 to the larger 1.2 to 3 million and the European. So we might have had less applications in the European side, which is why the figure for national is much higher for the last term. But it does vary, and we have all of those stats on our research email or on the research section under the stats and figures for the last 4 or 5 terms, which gives a nice breakdown of each.
And in a national context, has there been a change in policy to promote more research? Has more money become available as well? Is that the reason why perhaps this is the case?
Well, it's in a healthy scenario, a good proportion of research funding to an institution should come from national funding bodies. The problem in Ireland, as highlighted by several reports over the years, and which has been the subject of a lot of debate, is that there's a very restrictive budget that our national funding bodies have. As such, it's very competitive. So for certain calls, SFI could be as competitive as Europe or more so in certain instances. As Joe alluded to, we have to also consider the eligibility criteria. But I would say that with the new minister having taken function, Minister Harris, we would hope there is a commitment for more funding at the national level. And as Joe alluded to, because of the onset of Horizon Europe, the new framework programme, researchers are still getting to grips with all the new rules. We're guiding them on those. We're giving webinars and disseminating materials. But it takes a while to get to grips with the various rules. And so there may be a little lag time there. However, typically and in the past, WIT has had a great deal of success with European funding, and we're sure this will continue, and we'll do everything we can to support it. So sometimes for a certain niche area of research that's quite unusual, one can be more readily funded by a European funding source than a national funding body.
You mentioned eligibility. What does that mean? As in, what like who is eligible for research? What are these criteria? Like, why would I or not be able to apply for a call? How would that decision be made?
Well, it's set out by the funding body in the call guidelines, the documentation that they make available.
Okay.
And this stipulates what characterises the applicant or the main applicant. For example, for a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship, the person needs to have a PhD at the application deadline. For other types of larger applications, a certain profile and success in previous grants or coordinating previous large consortia which involve various institutions, academic companies, etc. in different countries would be required. And sometimes it's stipulated that the person needs to have at least one first author publication, for example. So this is something that can be quite confusing initially, and as Joe alluded to, we demystify that, and the team provides such information because it's important to know this from the outset.
Yeah, 100,000 years ago, I remember filling out a PRTLI grant application. I didn't get it, but even that, it was quite short compared to what I ended up doing years later. But even the form itself, it was like writing almost like a little mini thesis, on work that I hadn't done yet, which I found personally quite difficult. So I can imagine what it's like dealing with 196 applications.
196
applications. Yeah. I mean that's a significant amount of material to put together. And I know at the European level, like those documents are huge. A long time ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was, I remember working on a proposal. I think it was for the 6th framework. All the European calls, they seem to like to put these names on them that sound, I don't know, 6th framework. It sounds like, again, like a scaffolding company. But the amount of it, there was a large consortium. I think there were 6 partners from all across Europe, and the amount of work that went into this proposal.
There's huge pre-planning in any application.
We travelled we spent time in Sweden, and I think we spent time in Brussels, and we didn't get it. And we've got the next one though, and that was the thing. I think that was what was most interesting about it, was the amount of work. And I was quite deflated because that was the first one that I had worked on from the start, and we didn't get it, and I was deflated. This was when I was in TSSG, now Walton at the time, but the lads kind of the others weren't as disappointed as I was, I don't think, because I think they knew you win some, you lose some, and I maybe didn't have that experience. And maybe that's a thing to take away from research as well. Research funding is that sometimes you win and sometimes you lose.
Exactly. Resilience is really needed. Resubmissions are par for the course. And though it's disappointing, one learns a lot from the process of writing and applying for the application. Feedback is obtained from the funding body, which allows the researcher to hopefully resubmit in the future with an improved application. So it's a learning process, and grant writing skills and grant applications is a skill acquired with practice. It's honed with time, and it does take time.
Yeah, it is. Which is where the research support unit comes in. Because you have the knowledge. If I tried to navigate some calls now, I wouldn't have a clue. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I'd call Joe and say, Joe, what should I do?
I suppose there's certain sections across, and we do a lot of mapping exercise across the different agencies that are similar. So to try and help support that, in recent years we've built our cross-cutting teams document, which kind of outlines the sections of applications that, while not generic because they are specific to the project that you're going to be developing, it will help give you the tools or the guidance or the steps that you need to fill those in. Because you're right, Rob, it's very daunting. And I remember years ago when I worked with Rycon starting to write these applications, and there's a lot of pre-planning. You nearly need to know every step and every task before you've even embarked on the research. So like really having a fully fledged project plan and project management is a huge aspect of success within these. So the more you've done it, and that's why maybe your colleagues were less daunting because they've actually delivered projects as well. So learning from our colleagues who've had success is often really key there as well. And we can put people in touch with colleagues or researchers that have done it and done it well, because they were once like you at the very onset kind of going, I don't really know how this is going to play out. I've never actually conducted it, so I'm not too sure how to plan it. But there are samples of success. There are people who've had success who are willing to share previous applications, and that's something we can facilitate. And it really takes that whole feeling of, really deflated and discouraged, because it is part for the course. Losing on a grant application is almost, it's typical in your first round. But those reports you get from the agencies, the feedback you get from your colleagues will then enhance it. And it's like anything, iterative processes. Yeah. The first time you write something, it's not that good. You tweak it again, get some feedback and build it back into the application. And that's your road to success. But resilience is probably one of the key things our researchers need to build in more, because it can be, but the reward is massive. I mean, when you win a fund like that, a competitive fund at national European level, that's a huge achievement, and we treat that such. And the comms surrounding it and the support then too, we often shout a lot about those awards because it means a lot, because the road has been long for the researchers.
And to again bring it back to kind of nuts and bolts, imagine I was applying for some research funding for something and I won some money, but that might basically pay for me to work for the next 3 years or whatever it might be, and perhaps another person to work and maybe some equipment and blah blah blah. So it's almost like you're guaranteeing yourself a bit of work for the next while and securing your position as such.
Well, exactly. It depends again on the budget lines for the specific grant in question.
I know. I'm just making it up. Yeah,
salaries are often paid for the PI, or if not the PI, maybe a postdoc or a PhD student. The principal investigator. Okay. So it refers to someone who's a little more senior who would lead out a project, whereas a postdoc has a PhD, might be more junior, and then a PhD student, a master's by research student. But correct, it depends on the type of grant. The SFI infrastructure grant funds large pieces of infrastructure. EI capital equipment call is another call that funds equipment. So it depends on the scope of the actual call in question. But you allude to something interesting there, Rob, in the sense that grants do sometimes fund researchers for a few years, and there's a certain amount of uncertainty associated with that thereafter. It's particularly apparent among the postdoc population, and we've just with Emer Fitzpatrick set up a postdoc mailing group, and it's a group I would like to support and nurture, because it's difficult for a researcher if they are living from grant to grant, and that's the precarity of research careers is being more recently discussed, and it's important that we try to provide them with all the support necessary for success and also to plan ahead.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, I have some friends who have, I hate to say it, have bounced around a variety of different institutes, and it's very hard on their personal life, because it's difficult to put down roots if you're in Dublin one year and then moving to Maynooth the next year and then moving to Galway and then moving somewhere else, and it's not necessarily by choice. It's just that's perhaps where some research funding is available. It can be tough,
Yes.
It can be difficult, and it's interesting that you've referenced that. So that's hopefully there'll be some more developments in that area. Let's talk about scholarships, if you don't mind. And the scholarship, first off, let's, for the sake of argument, what is a scholarship? And then what ones are available?
Okay,
Joe, go on.
I will. I'll take that because everyone knows Joe Holohan in WIT deals with scholarships, and I'm really engaged with the postgrad community, and I love my work with them because they are essentially PhD students in training or Masters by Research students in training, and the scholarships are what funds them then to do that activity. So you can do a PhD here within WIT, and you can be self-funded. And then you can be funded. So if you're funded, it's typically under what we call a scholarship. So scholarships typically take the form of a 4-year funded programme. You get a stipend for your living expenses. You get your fees paid here within the institution, and you get a bursary then for any research costs, so that you're not out of pocket from doing the research yourselves.
Yeah.
So we have a number of scholarships. I suppose the most popular one, and the one that people might know, is we have the WIT's President Scholarship, which is run here internally. So the academic supervisor applies for this. They have a project in mind that they want to work on, and they want to secure a PhD candidate to do that. Okay, so they apply through the WIT scholarship, and if funded, then they recruit a PhD student, and that's a funded scholarship then. So the student then works under that scholarship. So I hope that explains scholarship.
So, and in terms of the money, what kind of money would you be talking about there?
So the WIT scholarship currently is at it's 86,000 in total for the 4-year programme, and that's fully funded by WIT. And we also, alongside of the fully funded programme, have a co-funded model where we're co-funding with industry, where the industry will pay 50% of that. Okay. So there's a lot of nice engagement. We have 33 projects that are live at the moment that are out with co-funds with industry. So either or, the student is fully funded. They get 15,000 stipend each year. 4,500 fees are covered, and €2,000 of a bursary. That's the WIT scholarship programme. Yes. There are a number of other scholarship programmes that are available on national level. For example, the main one that people might have heard of is the Irish Research Council run a call each autumn, and that's called the Government of Ireland Postgraduate Scholarship Programme. So it's funded by the government, and it's in essence very similar to our own scholarship programme here. Stipend is slightly higher for the IRC. They get 18,500 in a stipend per annum. They get their fees covered here at the institute, and they get an amount for research costs as well. So the fact that they're funded and they're supported through our office for the life cycle of their project, the 4 years, we manage and set up all of the stipend payments and the fee instructions and things like that. So we take all that burden away, and we engage heavily with the students and the supervisors on those. There are a number of other agencies that fund, like Teagasc Walsh scholarships fund ones in Agri. We have huge connections there with Moore Park down in Fermoy, and a number of our academic supervisors engage on applications to get funding for those, and then they recruit again for the PhD. So both the WIT and the Teagasc ones, it's the academic supervisor applies, and then they recruit for the PhD. And the Government of Ireland, the Irish Research Council, it's actually a student-led application, which is interesting because the students themselves then can apply and win competitive funding, which enhances their own CV then for research funding applications. So they have a kind of a win under their own belt, and they're also then funded. Say, for example, you have a student here, they're self-funded, they have an appetite for research, they want to do a PhD, they want to do a 4-year programme, but they're struggling because they're self-financed. They can work with us to build an application then to apply to the IRC to hopefully become funded. And it's lovely to see a self-funded student win an IRC scholarship. And there's great, I suppose, what's the word I'm looking for? Kudos that comes with the winning an IRC scholarship, because they're very competitive, very hard to win. It's a fabulous achievement, and the promotion of that throughout your PhD programme then, and the networks that it opens, it's fantastic. So they're the kind of key ones, I suppose, in terms of scholarship. And we've had great success last year. We had 13 new awards under the Irish Research Council, which was brilliant. And the success rate, while it's low, it's in around 18%. That's a really good achievement for the IoT sector, and we're building on that year with the supports the informational sessions, the training sessions. So we give guidance on writing those, and we run sprint writing workshops for those applications to kind of take the hardship out of it, I suppose. Yeah.
Can we talk through a hypothetical example of, let's imagine I'm listening to this and I have an idea of some research that I'd like to do in some domain. I don't want to be too specific, because I keep using a computing example, but I don't want somebody in a different discipline to think it's only about computing or science. It could be about anything. It could be research into theatre or poetry or spirituality or gender studies. It doesn't matter, right? I have an idea. There's something I'm interested in. I want to find out more about it, and there's work to be done in that area. What do I do next?
Well, you would contact our team via email often, or phone call. Our email is research@wit.ie, and the team member would ask you about, number one, your career stage. So are you a postdoc, for example, or what type of funding? So Joe has alluded to the PhD scholarship funding opportunities at that career level. So the important role our team play there is to identify the career stage and the type of project to assist the researcher to find the best fit for them and the best type of application. So they will then follow up to provide individualised support in the form of meetings, a proposal review if time allows. And there we ask you to engage early, please, with the team so we can best support. But to give you an example of a postdoc, so someone who is coming to the end of their PhD and is considering what to do next. We recently had a postdoc fellowship writing session given with our colleague Suze Gerard from IT Carlow, and it was given by Philomena Tracy and Jamie Power, and they provided a lot of advice about two calls. For example, the IRC runs a postdoctoral fellowship programme whereby the deadline typically falls in October, and they compared it with the Marie S. Curie fellowships, for which the deadline typically falls annually in September. And what they did is they went through the opportunities, the funding, etc. I have to admit that the salary on the Marie Curie Fellowship was a good deal higher. That can involve mobility. And take, for example, a global fellowship would allow you to go to a third country. So, for example, outside the European Union, to Japan, to Canada, to the USA. And you could do up to 2 years there and then return to the future TU to conduct the final year there, whereby the person goes out on a research and training fellowship. They acquire all these skills, they broaden their network with this prestigious fellowship if they're successful, and they return bringing their knowledge and network in turn back to the future TU. So we have an example of that. Rebecca Power just commenced her fellowship, her global fellowship, MSCA Global Fellowship in Illinois, and she's conducting that in the area of nutrition and cognitive health. Right. So we were delighted. In my former position as MSCA National Delegate and Contact Point, I supported to some extent there with Philomena Tracy, and we were delighted to see that win for the institution. So that's the whole process. The Research Office will assist the person identify the type of grant that is applicable to them and ideal. They'll give them information about the eligibility, the success rates, the funding to be obtained and the timeline, and they'll give some support post-award as well, though the bulk of our time is spent on the pre-award phase, this application support.
So if I came in with some idea about something, with notions about, I'm going to go in there, come on, we're going to get 6 million from the European Union, you'd put me back in my box. But you might say, you won't get that, but maybe there might be something in the national forum or one of the local groups, or maybe there's a consortium that's being put together in Europe and actually something that you have might fit well in there. Would that be because you'd have the idea, you'd know what's going on?
Exactly. We would guide you as to what is more appropriate given the type of research, the capacity, how many people involved. If you're an individual researcher, if you bring in a team, if you're a principal investigator and you bring in your team, if you're well networked internationally. We have other services commenced by Susie Cullinan and other colleagues like Research Professional in the past, and that's a database of funding opportunities. More recently, I've signed us up to be a member of CrowdHelix, which is an international networking platform whereby for academic institutions such as ours or companies all over the world can put a post of interest either to be a partner in a European funding project or to coordinate one. And that will be seen by all the other 500 plus members of CrowdHelix. And that's a service we've also provided to enable those who are newer to the field who wish to expand their network to do so as well.
You've mentioned network a number of times, and various people we've spoken to in the podcast have also talked about, people that they know, or I knew this person here, that person there, or I'd read this person's work and I sent him a message. How important are personal relationships in this game? Either of you now, whichever you feel.
Very important, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Firstly, it's about the research and the science and the skills and the expertise behind that. But it's also about how well you would work with that person based on character traits, actually. So that also plays a role, because if you're talking with people and are they reliable, will they deliver? If it's difficult to put together a group to apply for a grant, it will likely be even more difficult to implement the grant, and it's probably not a good sign early on. So personal networks are extremely important. As part of my PhD, I also got to go over to Boston to a lab for 6 months because of networks my supervisor had with a professor in Boston, and that was hugely beneficial, but also in building up larger consortia. One person might know a European-wide think tank which might be well suited to disseminate their findings on policy for that type of work. So networks are hugely important, yes.
And Joe, you're nodding as well, did you?
No, I just want to add there that it's equally important on the more industry focused or the applied researches as well, like in terms of the Enterprise Ireland Innovation Partnerships or the commercialisation funds. The networks there are really key, and having business support the research you're doing is often a key factor in whether or not it's going to be funded. So, it's not just all about the academic frontier research. Sometimes these grants will ensure that you have, and more so we're seeing more of that you have to show that it will have impact, that you have the supports and the networks are from industry or from other stakeholders, because they want the research to be impactful within the region, nationally and internationally, and you have to show it's going to have societal or economic benefit. So no more are we just doing research that I'd like to understand this and discover this, which there's a place for that too. It's research that actually makes a difference, and that's the kind of thing that we're always trying to steer towards and prioritise. Obviously, we want to do the research that the researcher wants to do, but we look at the bigger picture then to say, well, look, there are reasons that some of this is, I suppose, top-down, that some of the European funds are top-down, because there's research that needs to happen.
Yes.
So networking in that then gives people, because no man is an island, like I wouldn't have all the necessary skills to reach that goal. However, with my consortium or my network or with colleagues that, other people might know, I might be able to achieve that. So when you come to me with your idea and you want this amount of money, it won't be you alone that will be able to deliver that, and that's important. So yeah, I'd echo what Geraldine has said there, and that they're paramount, in particular for some cause more than other. There's still space for that individual researcher that wants to look at a niche area in their own project, and more fellowships. I would see that type of research being conducted. But by and large, the bigger, larger funds are all about the network and the consortium and the...
I wasn't trying to be narcissistic with me looking for a load of money. I should have worked out an example before we walked in. But I know what you mean. I mean, again, back in TSG days, we would have been technical people, so we were computer programmers, and we might tie up with partners who were good at. God, I'm trying to think now. I remember doing one on procurement, electronic procurement, and so we're dealing with people who are buying gates for governments and buying. I remember one time having a chat with somebody who was buying nails for local authorities and buying little parts like that. And I was like, how complicated it actually was. And then going around to Germany, and we were a Welsh partner and a French partner as well. And it was just so interesting, the different way that things were done. And then we were doing a kind of a technological side on it, but there were business people and, people from various different aspects. There was a sustainability aspect to it as well, which would have been relatively new back in the early 2000s for that to be baked into a proposal. Anyway, I'm going off on a rant.
Joe alluded to impact. I would also use another I word, interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinary work is really important, and funding bodies want us, such as the missions under Horizon Europe, be they devoted to, soil or cancer. They're addressing societally important questions of great magnitude for mankind, really, but that they're very complex, and that an approach utilising an array of skill sets and different disciplines is required to solve those. And I think the network also helps with that, in order to identify researchers with very, very different skill sets. And this can lead to a very progressive research project which could achieve a great deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's very interesting. I'd like to just ask you about the Research Awards at WIT, because the very first Research Awards took place just last year, at the end of last year. What are the Research Awards? And then I'm going to ask you a purposefully spiky question. What is the value of having an award ceremony like this? So go on, Joe.
Perfect. So yeah, the Research Awards, it was, I suppose, something that was Mark White really wanted to enhance the number of awards we had. So originally it started out with the Supervisory Awards. So for academic staff here who were supervising PhD students, that we'd recognise what they were doing, because it is often unrewarded or challenging to supervise a number of PhD students. So we wanted to create that. So that was where it first came out of. But then Mark always wanted to acknowledge the other researchers in their activity, the established researchers who've been working for years, sometimes without any gain to themselves. So we have a lot of academic researchers that would be doing it on top of their activities, their, let's say, lecturing activities and things like that. So as a way to reward and acknowledge people who have given up a huge amount of their time towards research activity. So we added 3 more categories last summer: the established researcher, the early career researcher, and also then the impactful, was it excellence in impact category, so that we could also acknowledge those, not only that we're doing research and that we're really active in their space, but that we're making a real difference externally, society-wise or economically-wise. So we looked at those categories, and it was a huge body of work, and it was our first time running it last year. And I would have been last year without my colleague Geralidine to guide me in the administration of those, because there's huge administration on the Research Award. But our ultimate goal was to acknowledge the people who we knew had worked really hard over the years here in bringing in research funding, in coaching and supervising and mentoring postdoctoral students and PhD students, and to just acknowledge that work and for it not to go unnoticed. So I suppose that's in a nutshell. It was really just to make sure that people don't forget about the great work that's been done by our colleagues, and we wanted to just say thank you to them, and I suppose to put their name in lights and kind of say these people have made a contribution.
Yeah.
We had a busy summer, but it was a great pleasure to design the awards with Joe, who administered them so well and with such, with such efficiency. I would say this is all about value and recognition, because we're creating, and particularly as we will become a TU, we're valorising research. We're recognising researchers for their achievements. And I think in terms of research culture, that's part and parcel of what we should be doing. And many researchers valued the ceremony, particularly in light of the pandemic, which had been somewhat isolating. This provided a perfect example to showcase them. I would say that the second element of that is that the Research Awards, apart from the recognition element, is the excellence element. The Supervisor Awards were assessed by an internal panel, and that comprised Joe, myself and Lauren Siri, one of the assistant heads of graduate studies, but we didn't know any of the applicants. We signed a conflict of interest. All of the other 3 categories that Joe alluded to were evaluated by external experts. So this ensures that there was a certain high level according to certain criteria which we had designed. We sent out the paperwork to the evaluators, and so we're ensuring a level of excellence. What was also fantastic for me was that researchers among the awardees, 4 different schools were represented, which was really excellent. It wasn't just STEM, it was also policy, humanities, which is very, very important. So that for me was a great experience. Yeah,
because I'm looking at the winners here. I don't have the list of the short list in front of me, but the winners. And that's what strikes me about is the breadth of expertise. So early career researchers, Kate McCarthy, she does a lot of work on exclusionary and gendered narratives, theatre and writing. And then you have established researchers, Pat Lynch from RICON, the management and organisation group. I know I'm probably getting that incorrect.
Biz tech lean sort of space, but applied business research.
I don't mean to insult him by getting that wrong. And then Ramesh Raghavendra from SEAM won the Research Impact Award, and then Brendan Jennings the Research Supervisor Award for the work that he has, the number of people he has supervised over the last number of years. He's kind of largely in the area of kind of computing and technology. So there's a huge range there, and I'd imagine will you run the awards again this year?
That's the plan. By then, we'll be a technological university. So the plan would be to run it across both sites, and it will be very exciting and another opportunity to recognise researchers across all disciplines and at different career stages as well. So yes, that's the plan.
Brilliant. Last question. If I normally ask people, if you had one piece of advice for aspiring researchers, what would it be? But I think this whole podcast has been that. So I'm going to ask you a different question. And it's, what is the biggest mistake that you see researchers making, and how might they avoid that? Now, I'll ask that of both of you, and whichever one you want to go first, go first.
I suppose on a practical level, and it's something that's very new to all of us, and why we're running a training session on the 21st of this month. The gender dimension has come up on a number of agency applications. So agencies have taken that, they write this into the application, that you need to ensure that you're, have thought about how gender is going to affect your research right through the project life cycle. And it can often be quite challenging to write that particular section in a research application, to think about how gender might impact the proposal idea, how it might impact the methodology, the way that I do my assessment of my findings, and the output and dissemination of that. Say, for example, that I'm developing a piano. Say the piano in general. The piano was developed for tested on male only, for end use. So that was only ever considered or in mind for a male person's hands. So if you look at pianos, a female's person's hands are far too short to reach the full extent and breadth of the piano. So a female pianist will never be as good as a male pianist because of the design. When the piano was originally designed and the research was being conducted, it was only tested on males. So that isolated the female gender in relation to the design and development of that. So it wasn't considered in the research. So as a movement now, we have to consider both genders, both sex and biological gender in your research activity. So that is often forgotten when people are writing proposals and they don't consider it, and evaluators will pick up on that. So it's very difficult and challenging for our researchers to even comprehend how might my research have a gender dimension, or how might it impact either negatively or positively on either sex or gender. Yes. So our training session will help people to incorporate that into their applications, because it's coming really key. So if you look at evaluation criteria and where the points go when you're scoring a grant application, there is scores that now go towards the gender dimension being addressed. So I know it's quite niche and it's quite a practical piece of advice, but I would consider that now as part of your proposal development, that you look at how your research could impact.
I'd imagine it's quite complex, but and I'm not looking for an easy answer, because there isn't an easy answer. I suppose maybe would the correct thing that you're thinking about it, that somebody's aware of it, might be half the battle.
I think awareness is one thing, but knowing how to build it into your proposal.
Yes. Yeah.
But certainly these sessions will help to build awareness of its importance. And there are other things, I suppose, that, applications can get critiqued on. But this is one that you mightn't be aware of, that you might know, I haven't written that correctly, or I haven't addressed it because the thought hadn't occurred to you, or you haven't thought about it with that perspective or that lens. And that's quite challenging, because it's not easy to think of, dependent on your research. Now, sometimes it doesn't apply, but where it doesn't apply, you have to be very clear that there is no, it doesn't have a place here within my project proposal. So, but I'm hoping that the session we have on the 21st of February, we have an external company coming in to give a session on that, and they've written an EU toolkit on this. I'm hoping that they will be able to provide and demystify that for our researchers. So we've good attendance for that already. So looking forward to that.
Brilliant. And Geraldine, what's the biggest mistake you see researchers making?
Aside from methodology, which is more complex, so it's section 1.2 in European funding applications, it involves open science, gender, various elements. I would say impact. Researchers can struggle with the notion of impact because an output is something that emanates from it, such as a publication. But impact can take years to realise. And that's complex. I think in terms of writing the grant, impact is dealt with in section 2, for example, of European funding applications. And what's often critiqued is perhaps that there is a lack of detail regarding the specific mediums or means by which something is disseminated or communicated, and to what group. So dissemination is typically of results to experts, to people who know about the research, either in academia, in industry, in policy. Whereas communication is, giving information about the activities to non-experts. And those could be children, older people, migrants, but they're the general public. And many ESRs or evaluation summary reports that I've read from my former position and even today would critique maybe a lack of specificity regarding how something is disseminated or communicated and to what group of stakeholders. And gender again should be incorporated therein.
Yes.
For example, one might communicate about physics and IT to an all-girls secondary school, to ensure that girls are informed about this and in order to attract more females into those male-dominated professions. But again, it should be specific and it should give metrics. So numbers, how many attendees at a conference at which you'll present, how many readers of a publication or how many visits to a website. So all of those, the specificity regarding how, to whom and the numbers is really vital for success in the impact section, and it's often where people fall down. Sometimes they also confuse dissemination to experts and communication to non-experts. That's a common critique as well that evaluators have.
And I imagine that's a minefield as well. It's that again, it's complex. There's no silver bullet or simple answer. But again, if there was a simple answer, it wouldn't be research, or everyone would do it.
Exactly.
Sorry, Geraldine. What you find is that the scientist themselves is very learned on the specific science that they're going to conduct. Nobody knows it better. They know exactly what they want to investigate. But sometimes they forget that the reader, the evaluator, doesn't know anything about this. So you really have to be explicit in the how and the when, and it has to be feasible and realistic. So they get so caught up in the state of the art or the preliminary research that they often don't see it as how this project might look from start to finish.
Yeah.
So it's that whole reading it through a number of iterations, but getting someone else to read your research, because sometimes when you're in your own head, and we all do it, you don't really see what's missing or what's unclear to another reader. So even if it's just a peer, even if it's a member of the RSU or whomever, get somebody else to read through your proposal before you hit the submit button, because often there could be something that you think is very clear, and it's like you said earlier, the use of acronyms, that may not be clear, because while they'll try and match your project area to an evaluator within that domain, they may not be an expert within that domain. So you have to write it for a non-scientific audience. And even ourselves in the RSU, we're good sounding boards because we're non-scientific, and I don't know the difference between an atom and a molecule. I don't think I remember the definitions anyway from secondary school, but it's important then for us to be able to have some bit of understanding as to what you're proposing here, because if we don't understand it, then an evaluator won't.
Yeah.
So using the supports that are there is key. We don't expect anyone to know all of the ins and outs, nor do we. We're constantly learning as well. But with that learning, it's working together to make better success or make better quality applications. And we're really fortunate to have Geralidine Canny, because she has a huge of experience that she's brought to our team in the RSU. And I think that using those, learnings and experience from looking at it from the other end has been really valuable for us, even from the grant officers, to learn from that. So, we're all constantly evolving and wanting to improve to build better success for our own institute. The IoT numbers have been moving up in terms of research funding, which is really exciting. And now with the onset of the TU, we think that will open up more opportunities for our researchers on the funded side of things. So really exciting times, actually, albeit very, I suppose, daunting from, I think, practical and administratively, this is going to be massive, but it's great to have that opportunities coming down the road from.
Yeah.
And I think as becoming a TU, there's an opportunity for a certain rebranding. We're becoming a technological university, and it is therefore expected that our research activity, capacity and funding would increase.
Yeah.
And this will in turn bolster our international profile. So exciting times ahead, and we look forward to supporting researchers across both sites in the future, continuing to work and ever more closely with colleagues at IT Carlow. And we're delighted. And might I also say in turn that Jo here was honoured for her valuable support of researchers here, because she won the Irish Research Council Research Ally Award a few months ago after nominations from researchers around the institution. So we do have a great team here. We like to help researchers. We think it's very important they get in touch with us early, and we're delighted to support them.
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you or find out more about you, what's the best place or what's the best medium to do that through?
Email research@wit.ie is the best, and your query will be assigned to the appropriate person in the team.
And you've a website as well. What's the website address?
On the WIT website, so there's a research section on the WIT website, so www.wit.ie/research, and that is broken then into the different sections that we kind of touched on. There's a wealth of information up there, which is available to the public. We've also been building our WIT Research Hub. So most people now within the Institute will be familiar of the Teams, our Microsoft Teams that people use. Within that, and on the WIT Staff Hub, we have an RSU section, which is a repository like any other shared repository, where we're storing some key information for our researchers, and we signpost people to that regularly. And we do have a global handbook of all the ins and outs from A to Z, which is I think about over 100 pages in length, but it details every step of the entire process, right from actually applying for funding right through to, okay, now I've won, what do I do? So that's often, and I know we don't always get, we focus more on the pre-support, but we also do a lot of post-award support and setting up the projects here internally. And, we've great support with the research finance team on that and the HR team to make sure that your project then runs successfully right through to delivery and report and closure. So, there's a huge amount in it, but we have learned over the years how to do it right, I suppose, and we try and pass that on to the new researchers, or the PIs as we refer to them, the principal investigators, who win those awards, or the awardees themselves.
Well, lads, thanks so much for speaking with me today. It's been a wealth of knowledge. There's a lot to unpack in there. But as you said, hopefully this might be a jumping off point to somebody to visit the website or to look at a specific document or a specific call, and then perhaps come back to you with specific questions that are tailored towards a call or a particular piece of research or whatever. We'll hopefully have you featuring on the podcast again soon. Geraldine, you've been on twice now, so you hold the current award for the most number of appearances. We'll get you on the Christmas episode when we do a quiz or something like that. No, I don't know, I'm making that up off the top of my head. It'd be a really bad idea to do a quiz on this because it'll all show up all of our ignorance. But anyway, lads, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I do appreciate it, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Great, thanks Rob.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Thanks for listening to 9plus. You can keep up to date with the podcast on Twitter at 9plus podcast. That's digit 9 PLUS podcast. We'll be taking a break next week, but back in a fortnight with more chat about exciting research going on at WIT.